Bueno, ¿ya?
Sí.
Bueno, mi nombre es Marina Álvarez Rodríguez. Soy cubana con mucho orgullo.
So we are here today with Alex Rodriguez, who directed Rooted in Cuba, that'll be showing at the Coconut Grove Film Festival. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, thank you for being here. I thought your film was so beautifully sentimental, reflecting back on your family history. So I first want to ask, what compelled you to tell this story?
It was a lot of things. So this documentary was made for my thesis project in grad school. And I knew I wanted to do something about Cuba. I knew I wanted to do something about Miami. And I knew I wanted to film my grandparents' story because I've never heard it at full length. And they're getting old, and I just felt like that needed to be recorded. Um, but it was a mix of that, and there's this argument that my siblings have a lot about whether or not we're Cuban, or if we're Spanish, or if we're just American. It's an argument that comes up a lot for some reason. And I just think it's like such an interesting question. Like, what are we? What's our identity? Because one of my grandfathers was born in Spain. So does that even,
Okay.
you know what I mean? Um, I don't know. So is that question of what are we is kind of like where the idea stemmed from.
Absolutely. That's so beautiful that you were able to kind of record your family story, especially as your grandparents are getting older. Did you find that working on this film and going through your family story helped you kind of process some of those feelings that you and your siblings were going through? I know that, in the description of the film, you talked about the hyphen in Cuban-American in particular and kind of trying to figure out your culture and determining your identity. Do you think that working on this project helped you in figuring that out?
It's a good question. I think yes. I always stood by that I was Cuban American. Like I never questioned it. Just
Mhm.
because Miami, there's so much like Cuban influence that there's no way that there's no Cuban in me. But I think for my siblings, it kind of like, especially for my brothers, I don't know why they're so like, they're like, yeah, yeah, I'm like more American than Cuban. I'm like, you're not. But I think for them, I think they saw it a lot more clearly, like what their identity was a lot more clearly
Yeah.
um, after watching the film.
That's awesome. And how did your family react to you wanting to tell this story? I know it could definitely be a more emotional topic, particularly for your grandparents who decide to leave Cuba and come to America. Were they supportive of the project? Were there any parts that they didn't want to speak about?
So my grandfather was he was just like, okay, he's down for anything. My grandmother was a little bit more hesitant, and I made sure to tell her like months in advance.
Hmm.
And it got to the point where she was asking me like when, like she was getting excited about it. Because in the beginning she was kind of like, eh. And then like 3 months would go by and she'd be like, when are we doing it? When are we doing the interview? And I'd be like, soon. Um, so I'm happy that I waited really like a couple months for her, but yeah, they were pretty open to it once it was happening. They were like kind of excited, which
That's
was great.
awesome. Have they seen the film?
Yeah, they saw the film.
What they think? Did they love it?
They loved it. I mean, I had to show my film at an artist talk, and my whole entire family was there, and all of them were sobbing.
Oh,
And then my grandparents, like I saw Mimi, she's in the film. She was like, kind of like holding back tears because she's not very emotional, but she was like holding back the tears, and she was like, "Oh my God, that's there in Cuba, and that's there in Cuba," because there's a lot of clips of Cuba in there.
yeah. That is so sweet. And I'm so glad that they got to kind of enjoy the film and work alongside with you. How was it working with all of that? I mean, I'm hesitant to say historical footage because it's mostly your family's footage, but all of those older videos and trying to compile and comb through all of that.
Honestly, it was like a very daunting process. This is my first short documentary that I've ever made.
Oh, wow.
So there was a lot of things I had to learn, especially with like organization. I was overwhelmed. I think I had way too much footage to go through. It got to a point that a classmate of mine saw me working and he had to like get on my computer and just organize it all for me because he was stressed. Um, it was really cool though. It was very cool to see because I've never seen Cuba like that, like through my
Hmm.
grandparents' eyes. So that was cool, but it was definitely overwhelming and I was doing it alone. So it was a lot.
That I cannot even imagine the amount of work to comb through all of that for the footage that you need. You mentioned this was your first short form documentary. What are some of the other projects that you've been working on?
Um, so I started film 2 years ago for school. Um, it's part of like their program. And before that, I was just doing like really short, like 5 minute documentaries about people around DC in the DC area. That was the most I've done. And this is, I mean, Rooted in Cuba is the last project that I've worked on as of like now. I want to work on other projects, but I think I just needed a little break after that.
Absolutely. So that's interesting. So you had done kind of some similar profile like stories. What was the biggest change working on a project that is much larger in scale and then also a lot more emotional for you because of that personal connection to your family?
Yeah. Um, it was overwhelming for sure. Um, and I had a lot of, you know what, the deadlines that I had made it a lot better for me because I just had to figure it out.
Mm.
Um, but emotionally, like it was actually kind of nice because I was working on a project about myself as well and about my story and
Yeah.
about like Miami's story. So it was like I'd edit and I'd start kind of crying because it was like that part of the project was very emotional or that part of the film was emotional. So that part was kind of nice and it drove me to like keep going. Um, but it was definitely very different. I had never done a documentary with multiple people being interviewed. So like figuring out that story and it was a lot. It was a lot.
Well, I think you did a very nice job with it.
Thank you.
Looking forward to kind of some future projects, would you try to do something a little bit larger scale, like Rooted in Cuba, or do you think you would go back to similar to the work that you had done before in DC?
I would like to do similar work to Rooted in Cuba. Definitely centered around Miami or Cuba. I think
Hmm.
it's a very interesting topic, and Miami's a very special place. And there's so many stories that can come out of Miami alone. Um, so yeah, I think definitely to that scale, I would love to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much you can do with so many different families and so many different people's stories. Obviously, this was a big personal reflection for you and telling your whole family story. What are you hoping that the audience takes away from watching your film?
Good question. I don't know. I think the film was all about this, the hyphen being diluted over generations of a family. And it's kind of sad. It feels like a death of a culture almost.
Hmm.
So I think everyone when in any culture can relate to this topic. Like anyone born in America is
Yeah.
gonna relate to this. So I just hope people feel like seen and heard because I know this is a topic for a lot of people, especially my age. But they're like, oh, what are our kids gonna be? Like, what are they? Are they gonna be American? Are they gonna be Cuban American?
Yeah.
Um, so I just hope that people, relate to the story and like feel heard and like understand what everyone else is understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any plans for this project after the Coconut Grove Film Festival of certain people that you want to be watching it or maybe go back and revisit it a little bit?
Um, I don't know. I'm new to this whole film world and stuff, so I don't really know where it can go, if I'm being completely
Gotcha.
honest. Um, Open to ideas if anyone out there has any ideas for me, but I would love for more people to see it. I mean, that's the
Yeah,
hope, I think, for any project, but um, yeah, I don't know. Right now, I'm just going, through the motions. But yeah,
that's awesome. Well, I think
yeah,
it's a great film, and I think it's very important for a lot of people to see because, like you said, anyone born here to some extent likely has a family member who emigrated in and can kind of feel the loss of that culture throughout the generations. So I want to just touch on your work on this project. So you wrote and directed this project. Did you enjoy both of that? Do you have a preference for one over the other?
I really enjoyed the editing process.
Really
Um, I
interesting.
know, very interesting, but I kind of get lost in it. I think I just get, I don't know, I just get in it. Like
Yeah.
once I'm locked in on the editing. Like it would get to a point that I'd be sitting there and my laptop would be going really, really slow, and I'd look at the time and like 8 hours would pass by, and I'd be like, oh, like I don't know, I really loved it so much, and I love how one tiny edit can change the entire storyline.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it's so amazing. So I enjoyed that part the most, honestly.
Do you have a particular kind of sequence of footage or something you did special in the film that's like your favorite in Rooted in Cuba?
Yeah, I think the montage of like all of the clips from my childhood in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning and the dancing montage at the end.
Oh, that one was so beautiful.
That one the ending one I really loved because it was a mix of all the, eras of my family.
Yeah.
Um, like down to my grandmother in Cuba on her quinceañera, which is nuts. So I don't know. I think that part is like the coolest part, and just like the comparisons at the end of what we're still doing to this day, compared
Yeah.
to what they were doing in Cuba. I think it's so cool.
That's awesome. And I know you mentioned you're a little bit newer to the whole filmmaking and that process. Did you learn anything from editing this that you are hoping to take into future projects?
Everything. I learned everything. I learned down to the smallest things about editing, like having a separate draft every time I go into Premiere Pro. I don't know why I I like didn't that didn't click for me in the beginning. Um, just like really small things like I
Yeah.
will take with me forever, but I really had to learn Premiere Pro for this one.
And that is a big program to kind of learn to make a project in. And you said this was part of a grad program. So did you have any support from faculty or any training through that?
Yes. So this was actually part of a much bigger project.
Oh,
It
okay.
included a photo installation at a gallery, writing a
Oh,
reporting
wow.
article. So I had a lot of like, my peers and all the staff, like all my mentors were very like, because this was a very big project. So they were so helpful. I really wouldn't have been able to do it without anyone at GW. Like they were incredible.
That's awesome. And what was it like working with a lot of different art forms to tell this story? You mentioned the photo installation and writing an article and then doing the film and the documentary piece. Did you find that you were naturally drawn towards the film side, or did you appreciate having to go through all those different steps?
I think the film the film part and the photo part were both my favorite.
Hmm.
I'm a photographer first, like that's how I
Oh,
started.
wow.
So that was a really cool experience to have my work up in a gallery. That was an amazing experience. Um, but I think I did dedicate more of my time to the film, honestly. Only because it needed a lot of my time, but I think I just really enjoyed the editing of the film.
Yeah.
And I would edit with like my family in mind, like my family watching it. So I think that I don't know, it made me like want to do it more. Like I loved editing.
That's awesome. And you mentioned you're a photographer first. What do you find is the biggest difference between photography and then videography?
Oh, I mean, there's so many rules in videography, I feel. Like there's like I like when I'm doing an interview, I have to remember like the lighting needs to be here and she needs to,
Yeah.
like there's and then you have to think about the audio, and it's so many small little things and details that you have to remember. And I think for photography, there's a lot of kind of ethic rules, and for photojournalism at
Sure.
least. But that I already know, I've been doing it for so long that I kind of already know that. But I don't know, the interview, I started an interview with my mom and I had to stop halfway through, and I was like, let's just not do this today because I did everything wrong, and I just had to do it again another day. So I think just all the rules and things that I have to remember for film is a lot.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more structured, but I think you did a really nice job, especially for being your first form longer documentary piece. I very much enjoyed watching it, and I hope the rest of our audience at the film festival get the chance to as well. But I want to thank you so much for your time today, Alex, and coming here to speak with us. It is such an honor to be playing your film at the festival this year.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course.